Polish public opinion on the United States and the Polish-American relations, a public opinion poll carried out for the Polish Institute of International Affairs, PISM. In August 2021, the Polish Institute of International Affairs commissioned a public opinion poll on the attitude of Poles towards the United States. The attitude of Poles towards the US is frequently considered sentimental and pro-American, heavily influenced by symbols, the common history, the contribution Poles have made to the US economy, culture and science, as well as American support for solidarity and for Poland's entry to NATO. This PISM report is the first such research to analyze the most important aspects of how the US is perceived in Poland. It may be advisable to repeat such polls every 2-3 years to find out whether opinions expressed by Poles are changing over time or whether they remain stable. Study assumptions and methodology. PISM developed a catalogue of common interests and opportunities, as well as problems and challenges in the Polish-American relations. These issues were analyzed in both a short and a long-term perspective. In the two polls conducted by ARC Rynek i Opinia, we examined the following issues. The attitude of Poles towards the US, the perception of the principles and objectives of the US policy, the approach towards security issues, the perception of the style of American diplomacy in Poland, the assessment of economic and technological cooperation, Poles' expectations for the future. The quantitative measurement was carried out by computer-assisted telephone interviewing. Either interview was carried out on a representative sample of 1,003 adult Poles, selected according to the respondents' gender, age, level of education and place of residence. Two surveys consisted of separate sets of 14 questions each, and several socio-demographic questions. The Afghan context of the survey and the gap between the media and the public opinion. Pessimism evident on the Polish media reports on the end of the intervention in Afghanistan contrasts with how these events were viewed by the respondents. The survey conducted on the 5th to 24th August 2021 coincided with the fall of the government in Kabul and the pullout of the US troops from Afghanistan. At that time, a total of 41% of the respondents had an optimistic view of the future of the relations between Poland and the United States. The interviews carried out following the fall of Kabul showed an increase in the proportion of individuals saying that the bilateral relations bring more benefits to Poland than to the US. Poles express a strong and widespread support for an alliance with the United States. The surveys confirmed a favorable social climate for boosting Polish-American cooperation. The question whether special ties have been developed between Poland and the US post-1989 was answered positively by 57% of the respondents. As many as 46% of the respondents view Polish-American relations as relations between partners that serve their common interests. Similarly, 46% of the respondents indicated the United States as Poland's most important ally. This proportion is considerably higher than the corresponding figure recorded for Germany and Great Britain. The question whether the United States would react in the event of a threat to Poland's security was answered positively by as many as 62% of the respondents. Only 31% of those surveyed supported the opposite view and did not believe in American military assistance. Does this mean that Poles are totally uncritical of the US? Poles are not uncritically pro-American. This is evident in the following 4 examples. As many as 54% of respondents believe that the decision to leave the US sanctions related to the construction of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline is contrary to Poland's interest. Poles are against the deployment of US nuclear weapons on Polish soil. The majority of the respondents, 53%, do not allow it under any circumstances. At the same time, 25% of those surveyed would only consent to the deployment of such weapons in a situation of direct threat to Poland. 54% of the respondents believe that the acquisition of American military equipment should always be linked to the possibility of developing the Polish defense industry. The respondents were also asked about the hypothetical criminal responsibility of US soldiers stationed in Poland. A total of as many as 75% of the respondents supported the view that these soldiers should be subject to the Polish legal system. 43% of the respondents were strongly in favor of this option. The generational gap as a challenge to bilateral relations. The survey has shown a serious generational gap among several age groups in Polish society. Opinions expressed by the youngest respondents, aged 18–24, are particularly worth noting, as they were frequently highly divergent from the opinions voiced by older groups. The survey results show that younger respondents attached less importance to the development in the US foreign policy. At the same time, respondents representing older age groups are more interested in these issues. A considerably higher proportion of the younger respondents indicated the United States as the beneficiary of the US-Poland bilateral relations over the last 30 years. A higher proportion of older respondents believed that the relations were equally beneficial to both sides. A generational gap is also evident in the assessment of the existence of special ties between Poland and the United States. Older respondents were more strongly convinced that this is what characterizes the bilateral relations. This answer was selected by 51% of the respondents in the oldest age group. The survey included a question regarding the European Union's future position in its relations with China and the United States. The youngest respondents, as many as 73% of them, preferred the EU to keep an equal distance from the US and from China, whereas in older age groups, more respondents were in favor of being the US ally. The survey included a question about the assessment of the expected impact of the new US administration on bilateral relations, which also showed a certain generational gap. In the youngest age group, 47% of the respondents believed that Joe Biden's policy would neither improve nor worsen the Polish-American relations. Respondents in this age group were also more inclined to expect a definite improvement in bilateral relations. This answer was selected by 27% of the surveyed individuals. Redzikowo, an unknown US military base in Poland. One element of Polish-American bilateral cooperation and cooperation within NATO turned out to be vague to the Polish public. As many as 76% of the surveyed Poles did not know the purpose of the installation which is being built in Redzikowo. A mere 24% of the respondents did have some knowledge of this military base. The vast majority of the respondents who did not know the purpose of the military base, as many as 64% of them, incorrectly indicated Russia as the state against which the Redzikowo base is intended to protect the European allies. These results suggest rather low effectiveness of the US and Allied public diplomacy regarding this NATO project, which is intended to defend Europe against missiles launched by Iran. It cannot be ruled out that Russian disinformation initiatives were also successful in this context. Practical conclusions. The study has demonstrated that Poles are aware of the differences in the potential and the priorities of the two states. The respondents assess the Polish-American cooperation carried out thus far positively. Poles have a common-sense understanding of the convergent and divergent interests of both sides. Their opinions are more optimistic than the prevailing opinions expressed in the Polish media. Issues such as arms supplies and the status of US troops in Poland require greater attention on the part of the leadership of both states, especially as they may trigger misunderstandings and ambiguities. In the future, generational shifts may contribute to an increase in the proportion of Poles who are critical of the US. This could trigger a decline in the level of Polish citizens' approval of the US actions and interests in Central Europe. At present, it is difficult to predict the exact time and scale of this decline. Full text of PISM final report on the Polish public opinion poll is available at the website of the Polish Institute of International Affairs, www.pism.pl.